Hello, everybody. I am Shane12088 here, back with another perfectly unscientific gaming review in Star Trek Online. And today we're looking at the legendary Dideridex Warbird Battlecruiser. That certainly is a mouthful to say. And this ship came out a couple of weeks ago. And when it arrived, it shook the community because a lot of people were a little bit upset that it was a 4-4 ship, and that it was a slow and lumbering beast, which it has always been in Star Trek Online, and they felt it didn't iterate enough on what was previously known as the Dideridex, but today we're taking a different take on that, and as you might see here from the shot, this is currently set up to be a science exotic particle generator Dideridex. That's something that I thought I would never see, but it is downright feasible, and there's lots of questions that raises too. So we're gonna dive right in here. Starting off, of course, the ship is a 4-4. It's got 5 engineering consoles, 3 science, 3 tactical, and 2 universals. Because we've upgraded it to tier 6X, it would just have 1 universal if it was not tier 6X. As of course it's been talked about before, the trait that was hilariously broken upon launch, rapid emitting arguments. We're not using it in this build, but when you activate Tractor Beam, you get a 15% bonus torpedo weapon damage for 10 seconds, and you fire 3 heavy plasma torpedoes. This has worked its way into some torpedo builds, and I look forward to playing with it on my main DPS character at some point in the future. Okay, so as with a legendary, it comes with all the existing consoles. We've slotted the projected singularity. It's a little bit hard to pilot with this because you need to time it so that you launch it exactly 8 kilometers in front of where you want it to blow up. So the idea behind this is if you do it correctly and infect it on a gateway, you can have it blow up right at the top of the gateway with all of the different spheres, and it does a nice amount of damage. It didn't work as intended in the run that I did, but I've got it to work a few times before. Feel free to sub it out for any other exotic particle generator console that you might find. As for weapons, we're running the fairly typical set of weapons for any exotic particle generator build. We got the particle emission plasma torpedo, dark matter quantum from the Discovery rep with its 2-piece phaser wide angle dual heavy beam bank set for its 2-piece set bonus that gives a critical severity buff for 20 seconds that stacks up to 25 times. Got the gravimetric photon set, or torpedo rather. We got the 4-piece revolutionary set that gives us our big mycelial lance. This has been on a lot of the videos in the past. I don't feel the need to say too much about it, but effectively what we're here for is this 3 and 4-piece set that gives us this burst of mycelium damage when we fire it. It says 126k, but it's a lot more than that. And then the 4-piece just buffs beyond that, gives us a bit of critical chance boost and hull capacity. But the 2-piece set, in terms of boosting exotic damage, critical severity, and flight turn rate, is also good too. Then in the back, we're running the Nukara web mines, the Black Op mines and the Nukara web mines, because that pairs nicely with the Tholian web spinner array, which was from the meta event reward run 2 events ago. Because with this one, it does a lot of damage when you activate the console, but if targets are held, all held targets will gain 50% bonus damage, so that's why these 2 mines are here to help us hold. Then we're running the ultimate plasma beam bank in the back. This gives us a global +1 critical chance, but also when it fires, it has a chance of debuffing the target's resistance to plasma, which you are probably wondering, why is that important? Well, it's because we got the particle emission plasma torpedo that leaves its clouds behind. But we also have the Badlands Plasma Storm module from the Maquis Raider that, when we use this, it creates a big swirling ball of death plasma that can help us out with that. And then the other weapon that we're running is the Temporal Defense Chronoton Beam Array. This is just in the back because if it fires off, it'll help us have a chance at, or rather, if it procs, it will help us reduce our bridge officer cooldowns. Console-wise, we got the Temporal Vortex Probe, which does a nice amount of damage, boosts exotic damage, and reduces cooldown on temporal abilities. Tachyokinetic Converter for the critical severity, critical chance, turn rate, and control expertise. I already talked about this guy, the projected singularity from the ship. Constriction anchor here purely to boost exotic damage and nowadays proc the universal design trait, which I'll get to more in just a little bit. The cascading gravimetric disruptions from the Earhart, which is a C-Store console. Aux ejection assembly from either the Kelvin Constitution or the legendary Kelvin Constitution. Delphic Terror Generator, which does a nice deal of frontal conal damage, boosts exotic damage and critical severity. Then our trusty exotic particle field exciter for EPG to give us plus 75. This is the only dedicated EPG console that I run on most of my science builds. Then we got the neutronic eddy generator from last summer's Ryza event, big swirling clouds that deal damage. Tholian web spinner I already talked about, but the click attack does an impeccable amount of damage, as you'll see on the parse. Then the Fakiri Torment engine, which is from one of the new missions that I always forget the name of. I'll throw it up in a subtitle over here, but effectively the reason we use this as a tactical console is because it increases our non-hazard damage over time. Damage increases fire, radiation, and plasma damage, which of course is our plasma from our torpedo in this case. You're not going to get as much use out of this on this kind of science build as you would on one that had a secondary deflector. So this one might be a candidate to disappear on this build, but it still showed relatively decently in the parse. And finally, with this, dealing non-hazard damage over time, damage has a 10% chance to trigger 1994 fire damage per second for 5 seconds. Then we have the bioneural infusion circuits for its critical severity, hull capacity, and control expertise, and then the plasma store modules I already talked about. Now, bridge officer-wise, this ship is a Miracle Worker Temporal, which leads it nicely to a energy weapon setup, beam overload setup, which you could entirely do on this ship. There's lots of discussion about already how that has happened. Maybe I'll link some of those videos in the side if I can figure out how. But what we effectively have here is the Commander Engineering Miracle Worker, Lieutenant Commander Tactical Temporal, Lieutenant Commander Science, Lieutenant Universal, and Ensign Universal. So we have deploy gravitic induction platform, and what this does is it pulls targets in directly to where you drop it. You can't target this, so it's not going to appear where you target your target. Instead, it's going to appear right at the back of your ship. So it requires a bit of piloting to get right, but it augments a weaker gravity well quite nicely, and it has the side benefit of helping our team as terms of creating extra shield bleed through. We also have destabilized warp core, which with this one, when we activate it, it gives us a radiation dot every 1 second for 15 seconds, and if the target dies, it will give a huge explosion for that area. Aux power to inertial dampers, that is just going to help us a bit with our movement speed as this is a slow ship, and emergency power to auxiliary for the EPG and control boost, plus some synergy with one of our starship traits, which we'll talk about very shortly. Timeline collapse in the Lieutenant Commander Tactical Temporal seat, chronometric inversion field, and Heisenberg amplifier when paired with tractor beam to proc unconventional systems to lower the cooldown on all of our universal consoles, which is where the bulk of the damage on this ship come from. We also have a Gravity Well 1, which is slightly weaker than the Gravity Well 3 that you would expect, but I find that it gets the job done. Photonic Officer that we pair with the improved Photonic Officer trait. More details on that in a moment as well, to boost our exotic particle generator damage and increase the uptime of this from 20 to 30 seconds. Subspace Vortex, Very Cold in Space 1, and Delayed Overload Cascade 2. And the usual caveat with this, be careful when you use this if you don't have enough control on the map, or you might make some people mad. Trait-wise, nothing has changed since the last time we looked at the Oberth here, but I'll just run through them quickly. Adaptive Offense gives us critical chance and becomes critical severity from max of 9. Conservation of Energy, which is a science captain trait that boosts exotic power. Context is for Kings, when we have a tank, this is a damage buff, and when we don't, it becomes a damage resistance buff. Fleet Coordinator, flat up damage boost for people based on the number of people on our team. Inspirational Leader, whenever we activate Bridge Officer abilities, it increases skills by 10, or has a chance to at least. And Particle Manipulator from the Science R&D School at level 15. That gives us critical chance and critical severity for exotic damage abilities. You must have this if you're doing anything Science exotic. Resonating Payload modifications. Whenever we fire a torpedo, we debuff the target. This is more of a torpedo build trait than an EPG trait. I might think of replacing this at some point, but it works quite well for me right now. Unconventional systems, as I mentioned, whenever we use our Gravity Well, Timeline Collapse, Heisenberg Amplifier, and Tractor Beam, we lower the cooldowns of our universal consoles, which is very important for the build, as that's where most of our damage comes from. And then finally, Terran targeting systems for plus 15% critical severity. And we might be feeling that speed debuff in this ship. Starship traits, we have assimilated power conduits from the Tal Shiar Adapted Destroyer. That's our synergy with our Ox Power for 20 seconds. We gain critical chance, 5% critical chance, and 25% critical severity for exotic powers. Exotic modulation from the Kronos Temporal Dreadnought, which is just given to us for 20 or 15 seconds whenever we activate a temporal power, and it's Cat 2 bonus damage as well, which is very, very nice. Improved Photonic Officer from the Tholian Iktomi, which increases the duration of Photonic Officer by 10 seconds, and in our case, we're using it for the boosted exotic damage power, which is pretty much a staple in terms of science captain traits these days. Spore-infused anomalies from the Hernandez Intel science ship whenever we use our Chronoton inversion field. Or, sorry, is that what this is called? I always get that mixed up with the three-piece set. Chronometric inversion field, yes it is. Timeline collapse, gravity well, and very cold in space, we get bursts of electrical damage that stack up quite nicely on the parse. By the book, whenever we activate one of our anomalies or a temporal bridge officer power, extend the duration of all active anomalies by 2 seconds. This comes from the Oberth, and I quite enjoy using it. So it's a fun little trait to have, and you know that Oberth punched above its weight in more ways than one. Then Universal Designs. This is probably the most expensive trait on here right now from the Crossfield refit. Whenever you use a universal console, you get a critical chance and critical severity boost that stacks up to 5 times. Once again, you don't need this. If you wanted to swap it out to something else, you could go with something like Strike from Shadows as an alternative example on that front. Maybe even rapid emitting armaments from this ship if you wanted to go a little bit more in theme with it. But pretty much any trait that boosts critical chance or critical severity, you could swap out for that, and there's a lot of different cheaper options for that. Improved Gravity Well might be an option as well from the Science Andorian, though I guess that really wouldn't make sense if you were using by the book, as I mentioned. But Checkmate would also be a good one. Granted, that's Cat 1 that comes from the Science Odyssey or the Legendary Odyssey or the Legendary Scimitar. Boosts our exotic damage for 15 seconds whenever we activate one of those controls. So there's a good amount of cheaper options that are available for that. Reputation-wise, we got improved targeting or advanced targeting systems from the Dyson rep, Tyler's Duality from the Discovery rep for critical chance, boosted exotic particle generators from the Iconian rep, critical chance from the Romulan rep, and Nukara Ox Power offense. And you'll note how low our power is because this is a singularity-based ship. All right, so that's the traits done. Duty officers are exactly the same as they were on the last time that I showed off one of these builds. 2 of these, chance to increase exotic damage when using emergency powered auxiliary, chance to reduce the recharge time of deflector, abilities when we use Gravity Well, though we might not need this given by the book and that we don't have a tachyon beam on this, so this one might go goodbye. chance to create aftershock gravity wells. Oh, and as you can see here, we definitely did not change this out because we don't have a charged particle burst. This just shows how much I decided that we were just going to keep things exactly the same as a meta science build. But if I was going to swap that out with what we had right here, I would put this guy instead of that charged particle burst duty officer. I would put this one in that increases energy resistance and buff duration for auxiliary power to dampeners. That would just be the quick little thing to do right there. And I think what probably happened with that is I was thinking in my head that's what I wanted that buff to be, or doff to be, but I never made the actual swap. Then as indie biochemist, that gives us a 10% chance to reduce threat reduction for 10 seconds when activating exotic powers. And once again, I use this because I don't always fly with a tank. All right, before we take a look at the run and the parse, here's what my skill tree looks like. It's the same skill tree that I've been using for all the science builds that we've been covering. Specializations are once again still the same. Temporal primary, mainly for this EPG boost, and a number of fun things in here, like this boost to space damage over time, the ability for us to get recharge on exotic power abilities. We don't use it for anomaly leash. Temporal crosswiring is good. And, of course, entropic rider is right here as well. That provides a nice boost for that. Secondary is strategist, and the main reason, of course, that we use this right now is that whenever we fire a weapon with not threatening, gives a 4% critical severity buff for 10 seconds, stacks to 5 stacks maximum, can get 1 stack every 5 seconds. Why else do we like this? We like this one here because we have the ability to place 8 foes when we activate the activatable. And, of course, also with this 3% bonus all damage per affected foe for 10 seconds when we use that. So overall, I haven't been convinced yet to move off strategist, but it's something that if something did come better, maybe something like constable, that might be interesting to look at too, but it's not a discussion for today. So the main thing you'll notice in this parse is that we don't have a secondary deflector bringing up the damage. Instead, we have our chained web projection getting almost 96k DPS. Then following from that, we have our pets, which is our neutronic eddies, the cryonic turbulence, the timeline collapse, Badlands cyclone, and the chronometric conversion field, and then the anti-time entanglement singularity. Then delayed overload cascade played an important role, as did our spore-infused anomalies and plasma storm. Our torpedo even is here without having a torpedo power associated with it. Mycelium emitter, 15.1k DPS. We fired off once, hit for 1.7 mil. Gravity Well 1 did 14.9k. Subspace Vortex 1, 8.2. We even got some riffs off without a torpedo modifier on that, so that's interesting. Delphic Tear, 8k. Destabilized Workpore, 6.4. Cascading Gravimetric Disruption, 6.1. Fakiri Torment, 5.3. And this is why I kept this on here, because I was seeing this appear in around this general area, around halfway down on most of the parses that I was doing, so it made sense to bring it in. But everything else from there just lowers itself down. And as you can see here, I even tried to get off a plasmic shockwave, but that really didn't work all that well. So there we have it, a Science Didera deck, something that really is weird in the format of Star Trek Online. And, you know, it did over 400k, and I always say DPS doesn't matter at the end of the day. If you want to do elite content, probably around 100k is a good mark. You can be competitive if you want to, but at the same time, if you just want to do something completely off the wall, you can do that as well. And hopefully this video showed that. So if you enjoyed this, give it a like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.